A young millionaire got a homeless woman pregnant, and everyone laughed at him. But years later, they were stunned by what unfolded. The chill of the night swept over the city, wrapping it in an icy stillness. Stephen Howell, a young and accomplished entrepreneur, felt drained after yet another demanding day of meetings and obligations. As he drove his car through the empty streets, he was eager to get home, to slip out of the suit that now felt like a burden. Despite the wealth and prestige he'd amassed, an unshakable hollowness had settled within him, and the loneliness lingered like a shadow. At a stoplight, his gaze drifted to a figure across the street, a young woman huddled in front of a closed shop, shivering and holding herself tightly for warmth. It was a heartbreaking scene, though familiar one in the city, and Stephen quickly looked away, pulling his focus back to the road as the light turned green. He continued driving, but the image of the woman clung to his thoughts. He tried to concentrate on his route home, yet the emptiness within him seemed even more overwhelming that night. Arriving at his upscale building, Stephen parked his car and went up to his apartment, a chic, meticulously designed duplex with a sweeping view of the glittering city skyline. Yet, surrounded by all the trappings of success, he found no comfort. Stephen shrugged off his jacket, tossing it onto the couch, and headed to the bar, pouring himself a whiskey. The quiet of the apartment only intensified the ache inside, and as he took a sip, the vision of the woman shivering in the cold came back, vividly, in his mind. He tried to shake it off to reason with himself. It wasn't his responsibility, but the sense that he should do something gnawed at him, filling him with an uncomfortable restlessness. He abruptly grabbed his keys, left his apartment, and headed back into the night for a reason he couldn't quite fathom. He drove back down the icy streets, retracing his route to the spot where he'd seen her. His heart beat fast as he scanned the sidewalks. When he reached the place, though, she was gone. A wave of frustration hit him, but he wasn't about to give up. Parking the car, he got out and started searching on foot, determined to find her. After a few minutes, he spotted her, curled up on a park bench under a thin, worn blanket. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. As he got closer, he could tell she wasn't fully asleep, but was struggling against the cold and exhaustion. Her eyes were half shut, and she shifted at the sound of his steps, startled. Raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm, he spoke in a calm but steady voice. "Hey, relax. I'm not here to hurt you." He watched her pull herself tighter on the bench, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and suspicion. Who was this guy? And why was he bothering her in the middle of the night? Not quite sure how to break the ice. Stephen took a breath and went straight to the point. "My name's Stephen," he said, hands still slightly raised. "I saw you on the street earlier, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. It's freezing out here." He glanced around the nearly empty park. "I live nearby, and I thought, well, you shouldn't have to be out here in the cold like this." She frowned, her guard still up. Softly, she answered, "Valerie." Her voice was wary, each word slow as she tried to gauge his intentions. "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" Stephen took a respectful step back. "Nothing at all," he said, pausing to choose his words carefully. "I just thought you might need somewhere warm to stay tonight, a safe place." Valerie's eyes searched his face, clearly torn between the need for warmth and the fear that always came with trusting a stranger. The biting cold didn't let up, and the offer of a warm shelter tempted her. But even so, she had every reason to be cautious. Sensing her hesitation, Stephen took a step back to show he wasn't a threat. "Look, I understand if you don't trust me right now, and I get it. I promise I'm not here to cause you harm," he said, his tone sincere. "I just want to help. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, but if you're willing, You're welcome to come with me. I just want to make sure you have a safe place to sleep tonight. Valerie hesitated again, her guard still up, but the bone-chilling cold and sheer exhaustion won over her suspicion. She gave a reluctant nod, her face still tense with caution. "All right," she whispered. "But if this is some kind of trick, I'll leave." Stephen nodded, meeting her eyes. "No tricks, I swear." Helping her to her feet, he led her to the car. An awkward silence filled the space as they walked, Valerie's reluctance still palpable as she climbed into the passenger seat. The drive was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Stephen realized that his simple offer of a place to stay for the night might be a life-changing moment for them both. When they arrived at the apartment, Valerie paused, her eyes widening as she stepped inside, taken aback by the vast, polished interior. Stephen noticed her reaction and tried to reassure her with a small smile. "Feel at home. You're safe here," he said softly, hoping to ease her worry. Valerie glanced at him, still with a flicker of distrust, but there was something in his tone that made her want to believe, even if only a little, that he meant no harm. For her, this could be her only lifeline. The apartment's grandeur felt surreal. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering view of the cityscape, and every corner was adorned with designer furniture, flawlessly arranged. For Valerie, who had spent recent months surviving on the streets, it felt like a world apart. Stephen walked through the space, setting his keys on a glass-topped table. He noticed her gaze, a mix of awe and unease, and felt compelled to offer some reassurance. He could see she was tense, and he understood. It was natural for her to be wary. A stranger, with wealth, offering help, might seem suspect to anyone. "You can relax," he said gently. "I get it if this seems odd, but you're truly safe here." Valerie's gaze held his, still guarded. Her mind whirled with questions. Why was he doing this? Most people didn't go out of their way like this. In her world, kindness always came with strings attached, but the fatigue and bitter cold had worn her down. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I don't know what to say." Stephen shook his head, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "You don't have to say anything. Just rest for now." He paused, studying her face more intently. "I'm guessing it's been a while since you had a hot shower, huh?" Valerie nodded slowly. It had indeed been months. She had gotten used to quick washes in public restrooms, where cold water was her only choice. The idea of a hot shower felt like a far-off dream. "You can use the bathroom here." Stephen pointed to a door down the hall. "There are fresh towels, and I can find some clothes for you. My sister used to leave things here before she moved overseas. I'm sure something will fit." Valerie hesitated, finding the offer almost too generous, almost unreal. Yet somehow, she sensed he could be trusted. Perhaps it was his calm, easy manner, or maybe it was just her exhaustion drowning out any doubts. "Thank you," she finally replied, moving toward the door he pointed to. Stephen stepped out briefly and returned with a pile of his sister's clothes, setting them on a chair just outside the bathroom door. "Pick out whatever you like," he said kindly. "Take all the time you need." Valerie took the clothes carefully and went into the bathroom. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking a breath and trying to steady herself. Everything happening now felt so distant from the harsh reality she'd been living through for months. She turned on the shower, letting the warm water flow before stepping in. As the warmth embraced her skin, a wave of relief washed over her, as if each drop was erasing months of hardship. She stayed under the shower for a long time, savoring this rare chance to unwind. Meanwhile, outside, Stephen moved thoughtfully around his apartment. Valerie's presence, so unexpected, so different from his usual world, stirred something in him that he couldn't quite define. He didn't fully understand his urge to help her. Maybe it was the recent loneliness that had crept into his life. Or maybe it was simply the human compassion he tried to keep hidden behind the mask of a self-assured businessman. Whatever it was, he felt he'd made the right choice, even if it was unlike him. Valerie finally emerged from the bathroom, dressed in one of the outfits Stephen had left for her. Although simple, the clothes felt almost luxurious compared to what she'd been wearing. She felt refreshed, but there was still a lingering unease in this unfamiliar place, almost like she was trespassing in someone else's world. "Are you feeling any better?" Stephen asked as she stepped back into the living room. "A lot better," she answered quietly. "I don't even know how to thank you." "There's no need to thank me," Stephen replied, giving her a warm smile. "I'm not looking for anything in return. I just want you to feel at ease and safe." Valerie sat down on the couch, though her movements were still tentative. She was beginning to unwind, but something inside her remained cautious. It was hard to trust that anyone, especially someone like Stephen, would do all this without some expectation in return. She looked at him thoughtfully for a moment, before speaking up. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was soft, with a trace of uncertainty. "I mean, you don't even know me. You could have just walked away like most people do." Stephen sighed, taking a moment to choose his words. "I'm not sure," he admitted honestly. "When I saw you, I just felt like I couldn't ignore it. I'm not usually the kind of guy who goes out of his way to help. But you seemed so alone. And I guess," he paused, trying to put his feelings into words, "I needed to feel connected to something real. Something beyond the routine of my life, which can feel so empty sometimes." Valerie studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was genuine kindness. She allowed herself to relax a little more, feeling the weight of her exhaustion start to settle in. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "It's been a long time since anyone truly cared about me." She hesitated, then added, "I lost my dad, my job, my home. Everything just started crumbling, and before I knew it, I was out on the street with no way back. It's been months since I felt anything close to safe." Hearing her words, Stephen felt a tight ache in his chest. Her struggles seemed so removed from anything he'd ever known, and yet she had made it this far. He was moved. "I know it feels strange," he said gently, "but you can stay here as long as you need. No strings attached. If you feel like it, you're welcome to help out with a few things around here," Stephen said, his tone warm but unpressured. Valerie nodded in appreciation, though a trace of uncertainty lingered. She recognized that her life had taken her somewhere she'd never imagined, filled with unfamiliar faces and unknown outcomes. For the first time in a long while, however, she felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to reset, though a part of her remained cautious. As sunlight poured gently through the apartment's large windows, it cast a soft glow over the living room, where Stephen was already awake, prepping breakfast. Normally not an early riser, and certainly not one to bother with preparing meals, he felt a shift this morning. Valerie's quiet presence seemed to add a certain warmth to the space, lightening the air in a way that was new. Stephen carefully arranged the table with a simple spread of fresh bread, colorful fruit, and steaming coffee. He noticed himself thinking about Valerie with every small task, feeling an unexpected connection that had begun the moment she crossed his threshold. Though they were practically strangers, he sensed that her past held a heavy load, and a part of him was moved to help relieve some of it. In her room, Valerie awoke to the sounds of dishes clinking softly and the comforting aroma of coffee. For the first time in months, she'd slept soundly, and the deep exhaustion seemed to ease its grip, even if just temporarily. The hot shower, fresh clothes, and safe surroundings provided a rare comfort she hadn't thought possible anymore. Yet as she opened her eyes, a familiar unease surfaced. She was, after all, in the home of a man she barely knew. Although his kindness was evident, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that it all might come at some hidden price. Still, she pulled herself together and stepped into the living room, where Stephen was waiting, already seated. "Good morning," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I hope you were able to rest." "Good morning," Valerie replied, a bit taken aback by the scene before her. "Yes, I actually did. Thank you." Stephen gestured toward the chair at the table, inviting her to join him. "Please, have a seat. I made breakfast." Valerie hesitated momentarily, but the inviting smell of the meal drew her in. She took a seat, still feeling a bit uneasy about his kindness. As they began to eat, the silence between them gradually softened. Stephen observed Valerie closely, noticing her careful movements and the tired look in her eyes that seemed to hold stories of struggle. He was curious about her past, eager to understand how she ended up on the streets. Finally, it was Valerie who spoke up, her voice quiet, but carrying a trace of pain. "You're probably wondering what led me here." She glanced at Stephen, realizing they hadn't touched on her story yet. "It's a long story, and it's not exactly cheerful." Stephen put his coffee cup down, leaning in to show he was ready to listen. "If you want to talk about it, I'm here for you, but only if you're comfortable." Valerie took a deep breath. Part of her felt it was time to share, although a small voice warned her not to completely trust. Still, Stephen's steady, non-judgmental gaze made her feel safe enough to begin. "I worked as an administrative assistant for a small company," she started, her eyes dropping to her cup. "It wasn't the most amazing job, but it covered my rent and bills. Then my father got sick, and I was the only one to look after him." Her voice wavered for a moment, but she pushed forward. "After he passed, I just couldn't keep going. I lost my job. With no income, the bills stacked up quickly, and before long, I was out on the streets." Stephen listened intently, absorbing the weight of her words. Her journey was painful, yet her strength shone through. She had faced so much hardship, and still, she was here, surviving. "I tried everything I could," she continued, her emotions now surfacing. "I reached out for help and tried to find a new job, but once you're down, it's tough to climb back up. The people I used to know started avoiding me, like I didn't exist." The silence that followed was heavy. Stephen felt a mix of sorrow and compassion for her. Life could be merciless, but hearing her story directly made him see things differently. Something deep within him stirred. He wanted to do more for her, to make sure she'd never have to face such hardship alone again. "I'm truly sorry you had to go through all that," he said sincerely. "No one should have to endure that alone." Valerie offered a small smile, feeling grateful for his support, yet uncertain about where this would lead. Stephen leaned forward, looking resolve. "Valerie, I have an idea," he began. "I know you don't really have anywhere to go, and I'd rather you didn't end up back on the streets." His gaze held hers, calm but firm. "If you want, you can stay here. I'm not trying to give you a handout," he added. "I know it might be hard to take help from a near stranger, but maybe you could pitch in with some small things around the apartment. It's nothing big, just a way for you not to feel like you owe anyone. In exchange, you'd have a safe place to stay. What do you think?" Valerie sat quietly, absorbing his words. The offer felt almost unreal, too good to be true. She had previously experienced Help's betrayal, so her trust barriers were high. But something in Stephen's tone felt authentic, lacking the control or imbalance of past experiences. "Are you saying I could really stay here?" she asked, still wary. "Yes," Stephen replied, "and if you're comfortable with it, you can help me with a few small tasks, nothing difficult. My priority is making sure you're safe. I'm not expecting anything from you, Valerie. If you want to leave, the door's open whenever you want." Valerie paused, considering. Deep down, she recognized that her choices were limited, and somehow Stephen seemed sincere. Despite her lingering skepticism, for the first time in ages, she felt a sliver of hope for stability, a life without constantly fearing the next day. "I accept," she whispered, her voice steady but soft. "I'll take your offer." She accepted, and Stephen's face broke into a smile. Oddly, the idea of her staying brought him more happiness than he was ready to admit. It wasn't just her outer beauty that drew him. It was her quiet resilience, her determination to survive despite everything falling apart around her. Valerie took another sip of coffee, feeling a burden begin to lift, and Stephen watched her, knowing their lives had just taken a new turn together. The tension was fading, though something profound seemed to be forming between them. As the weeks rolled by, life in Stephen's apartment unfolded more peacefully than either of them had expected. The routine that had once been quiet and solitary took on a fresh, vibrant quality with Valerie's arrival. At first, their time together felt reserved and slightly uneasy, but soon it started to develop a subtle warmth. The apartment, previously a mere emblem of Stephen's unshared success, now felt animated, as though Valerie had infused it with a liveliness he hadn't known he was missing. Days began to meld into one another, Valerie, always unassuming, quietly pitched in with small tasks around the home, arranging things, preparing meals, and keeping the space neat. Her presence gradually brought lightness to everything, and Stephen noticed how her comfort in the apartment grew each day. The change was evident in the little moments, the smile she gave him as they crossed paths in the kitchen, the gentle tone of her voice as they chatted about everyday things, and her movement around the apartment, now more assured and natural. But beyond these details, something deeper was taking shape. Stephen couldn't ignore the growing feelings he had for Valerie. Initially, he had seen her as someone he was helping, a gesture of kindness amidst his otherwise hectic life. But as time passed, his view began to shift. He began to dream about her, dreams that weren't always clear but left him feeling stirred when he awoke. It was an unusual blend of fondness, longing, and most of all, an emotion he was only starting to understand: love. One evening, after a long day at work, Stephen jolted awake, his heart pounding. He had dreamed of Valerie again. In the dream, they had been together, talking and laughing. Yet, there was a depth to their connection that was unlike anything he had known. The feeling left him shaken. Standing on the edge of a threshold, he wasn't sure he should cross. He worried about how she might respond. Was he the only one feeling this way? What if she didn't feel the same? Would his honesty risk the delicate bond they had nurtured? Stephen stepped out onto the balcony, letting the cool night air soothe him as he looked out over the city lights, acknowledging to himself that he was in love. It wasn't part of his plan, but it wasn't something he could suppress. Meanwhile, Valerie was experiencing her own emotional journey. Those first weeks in Stephen's apartment had been a whirlwind of emotions. She had her share of lingering doubts, but with time, Stephen's steady, respectful demeanor made her feel more at ease with each passing day. He had always respected her boundaries, never asking for more than she felt ready to give. His gentle nature, his thoughtful acts, and the way he treated her with respect, even knowing about her past, moved her deeply. One morning, while making coffee, Valerie caught herself smiling, recalling a light-hearted conversation they'd shared the night before. Stephen had this surprising way of making her laugh, something she hadn't done in what felt like ages. Gradually, it was as if she were rediscovering pieces of herself that had been hidden away during her difficult time on the streets. "Good morning," Stephen's voice broke her thoughts. She turned, surprised that she hadn't heard him approach. "Good morning," she replied, a smile lingering on her face. He walked over and glanced at the coffee brewing on the counter. Somehow, Valerie had brought a fresh sense of warmth into the home. Their glances seemed to linger a bit longer, and the unspoken energy between them was almost tangible. "You bring so much care to everything around here," Stephen said softly. "This place feels different since you came." Valerie looked away, a little shy but moved by his words. "I'm just trying to give back a little for this opportunity you've given me," she replied, hesitating. "I never thought I'd be here, in a place like this, after all I've been through." Stephen noticed the vulnerability in her voice and instinctively reached out, resting his hand gently over hers. "You deserve more, Valerie. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're not alone now. You don't have to be." His touch, tender and unexpected, sent her heart racing. She looked up into his eyes, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The time they'd shared had woven a quiet connection between them, one they both were starting to recognize. As they held each other's gaze, there was an unspoken acknowledgement that something meaningful was growing. "Stephen," Valerie began, her voice uncertain, "I don't know how to manage this." "Manage what?" he asked, his tone kind yet full of emotion. "All of this. You. Me." She looked down, trying to gather her thoughts. "When you found me, I was completely lost. Sometimes I still feel that way. But now I feel like I'm changing." Stephen felt a comforting sense of relief as he saw the mutual understanding between them. "I feel the same," he said, moving a bit closer to Valerie, their eyes still locked. "Since you came into my life, things have changed in ways I didn't see coming. I can't imagine what it'd be like without you now." A warm mix of excitement and nervousness welled up inside Valerie. She realized she was falling for him, yet the weight of her past held her back. "I'm not perfect," she admitted, her voice a bit shaky. "You know the things I've been through. I'm not like the women you're probably used to." Stephen gently placed his hand on her cheek, stopping her. "Your past doesn't matter to me. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for you." He smiled, his eyes showing a sincerity that caught her off guard. Valerie closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch, and in that moment, she knew her feelings were undeniable. When she looked at him again, she found his gaze filled with tenderness and hope. "I think I've been searching for you too," she whispered, finally acknowledging her own heart. They stood quietly for a moment, the world around them fading away. Then, with a gentle move, Stephen leaned in closer, and their lips met in a soft, tender kiss. It was hesitant, yet meaningful, like a release of all they'd held back. That kiss was more than the start of a romance. It was a quiet promise to face whatever lay ahead together. After that first kiss, something shifted between Stephen and Valerie. The bond they had stumbled upon so unexpectedly began to flourish with a depth that surprised them both. Valerie, though still battling her self-doubt, found herself feeling at ease with Stephen, experiencing a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in ages. Stephen, meanwhile, discovered a newfound joy in his daily life since Valerie became part of it. Each morning felt brighter, every evening more comforting, and as days passed, their connection only grew stronger. They began to open up more, sharing their fears and hopes, building an intimacy that needed no words. For Stephen, having Valerie around was like finding solid ground in the middle of his fast-paced, high-stakes career. But his happiness didn't escape the attention of those around him. At the office, Stephen's business associates began noticing a shift. The once laser-focused executive now seemed a bit more at ease, a little less tightly wound, and word of his relationship with Valerie soon drifted through the company's corridors. During a crucial meeting one morning, Stephen caught the exchanged glances among his partners. There was tension in the room, something he could tell stemmed from his private life. "So, Stephen," began Christian, a senior partner, crossing his arms and leaning forward on the table. "We've heard there's someone new in your life." Stephen's brow creased as he caught the tone in his colleague's voice. "Yes, Valerie. She's very important to me," Stephen responded, bracing himself for what was likely coming next. Another partner, Frank, let out a quiet chuckle and leaned in. "I've heard she used to be homeless. Is that true?" Stephen felt the pressure building, but kept his composure. He knew remarks like this would come eventually, but hadn't expected them to be so blunt. "She did go through some hard times," Stephen replied, meeting their gazes head-on. Christian and Frank exchanged uneasy looks, and Frank decided to press further. "We're just looking out for you, Stephen. You're a successful man with a lot at stake here. Just, be careful. Relationships like this can get complicated. Imagine if something unexpected happened, like a pregnancy." Stephen felt frustration rise within him. Their words weren't about concern, they barely masked their prejudice. The fact that he, an accomplished businessman, was dating someone from a less privileged background made them uneasy. It was as if they were subtly suggesting Valerie didn't deserve a place in his life. "I appreciate the concern, but my personal life is mine and mine alone," Stephen said firmly, ending the discussion. Though the meeting continued, his colleagues' remarks lingered, leaving him with a sense of bitterness. When Stephen came home that evening, Valerie could tell right away that something was off. He tried his best to hide his frustration, but it showed through regardless. "What happened?" she asked, sensing the tension hanging in the air. Stephen sighed deeply, looking at Valerie as heaviness settled in his chest. He'd wanted to shield her from this, at least for a little longer, but he knew that avoiding it would only make things worse. "Some of the partners at work had things to say about us today," he began, taking a seat beside her on the couch. "They made remarks about our relationship, about your past." Valerie bit her lip, feeling the weight of his words even before he finished speaking. That old fear, always lurking in the back of her mind, surged forward once again. "What did they say?" Her voice trembled slightly. Stephen paused, but decided it was best to be upfront with her. "They suggested I should be careful not to get you pregnant. Like it'd be some kind of problem, or that you're somehow less than because of where you've come from." Valerie felt the sting of his words, even though they weren't his. She knew people would judge her, but hearing it directly from Stephen made the reality harder to ignore. The harsh stares and the hushed whispers about her past all seemed to return in full force. Even though Stephen was there beside her, the insecurity she had since leaving her old life loomed larger than ever. "I knew this would happen," she murmured, eyes downcast. "People will never see me as someone who belongs in your world. To them, I'm just the woman you rescued." Stephen took her hand, his voice soft but firm. "I don't see you that way, and I won't let anyone make us question that. You're so much more than what you've been through." Valerie looked at him, hearing the sincerity in his words, though her doubts lingered. "Stephen, I don't want to be something that holds you back. I don't want people judging you for being with me. I know I'm not from your world." Maybe they're right. Stephen immediately shook his head. No, they're not right. I chose you, and I don't care what they think. They don't know what we have, and they don't need to. Valerie managed a small, fragile smile. She loved Stephen deeply, but the fear of rejection by his world was a barrier she'd have to face. His partner's comments only fueled her insecurities, and in the days that followed, they noticed more curious stares and murmured remarks. Valerie tried to keep her composure, but it was tough to ignore how people around her reacted. Stephen, however, stood by her side unwaveringly, making it clear that he would always choose her, no matter what anyone else thought. Yet the criticism from others left traces of doubt, particularly in Valerie's mind. The pressure to prove herself, to show she was more than just her past as a homeless woman, started to weigh on her. Their love was growing, but the challenges from outside were relentless, and they both understood they would need to face these struggles together if their relationship was going to survive the storm. Their love had already taken root in the most unexpected way, and they were both determined to show that it could withstand whatever came their way. Months passed, and despite the criticism and hurdles, Stephen and Valerie built a strong foundation. Their connection grew deeper, and their love felt like an anchor in the midst of life's chaos. But fate had more surprises in store for them. One morning, Valerie woke up feeling noticeably different. She had been feeling queasy and unwell on and off for a few days, which she'd brushed off as stress. Yet that morning, she sensed there might be something more to it. After visiting the doctor, her suspicions were confirmed. She was pregnant. The news came as a shock. Sitting in the doctor's waiting room, the word pregnancy echoed in her mind. She could hardly believe it. At first, fear gripped her. How would this change her life? And more importantly, what would it mean for her relationship with Stephen? She knew he loved her deeply, but doubts about her readiness to become a mother crept in. She still carried the insecurities of her past, and now, with a baby on the way, those uncertainties seemed to multiply. When she got home, Stephen was still at work, and Valerie used the time alone to take in the news. She gently touched her stomach, still in shock at the enormity of what was happening. Part of her was scared, but another part felt hopeful about building a family with the man she loved. That evening, Valerie finally shared the news with Stephen. She waited for him in the living room, her heart pounding. As he walked in, tired from a long day at work, she knew she couldn't keep it to herself any longer. "Stephen, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Sensing her unease, Stephen stopped what he was doing and moved closer, sitting beside her on the couch. "What's going on?" he asked, concerned. Valerie took a deep breath, clasping his hands tightly. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Stephen blinked, absorbing the news. Then, slowly, a broad smile spread across his face. "Pregnant?" he repeated, almost as if to convince himself. "We're going to have a baby." Valerie nodded, her eyes welling with nervous tears. Stephen's reaction surprised her. He looked thrilled, his eyes bright with joy. "This is incredible," he said, pulling her into a warm embrace. "I've always dreamed of being a father. I can hardly believe it." His excitement and relief eased her worries for a brief moment. But soon, reality settled in. And over the following weeks, Valerie began experiencing discomforts that left her uneasy. At her next doctor's visit, she received troubling news. After thorough testing, the doctor shared her concerns. "Valerie," the doctor said seriously, "your pregnancy is high risk. There are complications that could affect both you and the baby, so we'll need to monitor you closely." The doctor's words hit hard, leaving Valerie feeling the weight of the situation. When she shared the news with Stephen, he immediately hugged her, though she could see worry flash in his eyes. "We'll face this together, Valerie," he assured her, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, I'll be right here." And Stephen held true to his promise. Through each doctor's appointment and every test, he stayed by her side, making sure she never felt alone. But as the months passed, the challenges only grew harder. Valerie began feeling the full impact of her health struggles. She experienced constant nausea and pain on some days, making it difficult for her to move. Stephen tried to keep his calm, but it was obvious the pressure was getting to him. Valerie, feeling the weight of it all, couldn't shake off a sense of guilt. Even though Stephen was right there with her, she felt responsible. She felt guilty for putting too much on Stephen's shoulders, guilty for causing so much scrutiny, and most of all, guilty for doubting her ability to be a good mom. "I'm not sure I can handle this," she whispered one night after a particularly tough appointment. "What if something happens to the baby? What if I'm not a good mom? You deserve someone who—" She didn't get to finish before Stephen gently stopped her, holding her face in his hands. "Don't say that," he replied softly. "You're the woman I love, and we'll face this together. You're strong, Valerie. And Jason," he smiled as he said the name they'd chosen, "is going to have the best mom he could ever ask for." But despite Stephen's encouraging words, Valerie wrestled with her insecurities. The stress from the pregnancy and the outside pressures weighed on them both, making their relationship tense. Even though arguments were rare, they sometimes couldn't avoid them, each carrying their own set of worries. As the pregnancy continued, so did the anxiety. Valerie needed constant medical checkups, with the doctors frequently warning them of the risks involved. The fear that something could go wrong seemed to follow them like a shadow. But Stephen stayed positive, doing everything he could to reassure her. As the months went by, the strain became more apparent. Valerie was both physically and mentally worn out, and despite Stephen's support, she felt exposed. The challenges of her pregnancy didn't just make her worry about the baby's health, it made her doubt her own ability to cope with it all. Meanwhile, Stephen was juggling his personal life and the demands of his job, where his partners grew frustrated with his divided attention. Yet for Stephen, nothing mattered more than Valerie and the baby's health. Then, unexpectedly, the day came. Valerie went into labor early, and Stephen, filled with worry, rushed her to the hospital. His pulse pounded as he drove, wrapped in a silence thick with tension. The fear of losing Valerie or their baby gnawed at him, but he stayed steady at her side, trying to be her rock. The hours that followed were almost unbearable. The delivery was challenging, and Jason came into the world prematurely, delicate, and needing intensive care. The faint sound of his first cry brought a brief wave of relief to Stephen's heart. But reality hit quickly. Jason's fragile state meant he'd require constant, around-the-clock attention. In the days that followed, Stephen and Valerie endured some of the hardest moments of their lives. Sleepless nights blurred together as they sat next to Jason's incubator in the neonatal intensive care unit, watching each small movement of their son. Every beep of the monitor was a reminder of the delicate line Jason's life walked. Yet they stayed close, finding strength in each other. Stephen, drained and emotionally spent, gave everything he had to be there for both Valerie and Jason. Work was an afterthought now. His only wish was to bring his son home safe and sound. Valerie, meanwhile, wrestled with feelings of helplessness, often blaming herself for the challenges Jason was facing. "What if he doesn't make it?" she asked one long night, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I failed him, Stephen. I failed as a mother." Stephen took her hand in his, looking at her with a tender resolve. "You didn't fail, Valerie. You're the strongest person I know, and our son's strong too. He'll make it through this, and we'll make it together." After weeks of uncertainty, they finally received the news they had longed to hear. Jason was stable enough to leave the hospital. Bringing their son home filled them with joy they couldn't contain. The apartment, which had previously been silent and shrouded in fear, now felt alive. Stephen's sister Julia flew in to meet her new nephew, bringing with her a renewed sense of support and joy. The family came together to celebrate Jason's life, and the apartment, once a place of isolation, now felt like a warm, loving home. Yet even with Jason home, Valerie's worries didn't vanish entirely. He was still so fragile, and her heart ached with lingering concerns for his health. She found herself questioning, again and again, whether she was truly capable of being the mother he needed. One afternoon, as she held Jason tightly, she murmured, "I don't know if I'm enough." Her voice trembled. "I'm so scared I won't be able to care for him in the way he deserves." Stephen stepped in quietly, wrapping his arms around both her and the baby. He held them close, his warmth offering her a sense of comfort. "Valerie," he whispered, "you're already doing it. You're an amazing mother, and Jason is so fortunate to have you." His words filled the room with reassurance. "We'll give him all the love and support he needs," he continued softly. "We're in this together, every step of the way." The love and unity between them, tested and strengthened by each hardship they had faced, became the bedrock of their new family life. While fears and uncertainties about what lay ahead continued to linger, there was also a budding hope. Hope that together they could weather any storm and give Jason a life full of love. As time passed, the Howell family flourished in ways Stephen and Valerie never could have predicted. Jason, once so small and fragile, grew into a strong and healthy boy, surprising everyone with an extraordinary gift for music. From an early age, he displayed a special sensitivity and expressiveness when playing instruments, especially the piano, and it quickly became clear that music was his passion. By the age of 6, Jason was already performing at local festivals, captivating audiences with his skill and undeniable charm. His talent didn't go unnoticed. Experienced teachers and musicians soon recognized his potential, and before long he was winning awards in competitions. With every performance, Valerie felt her heart fill with a joy she could hardly put into words, watching her once fragile son now shine on stage with a quiet confidence. "He has a gift, Stephen," she would say after one of his performances, her voice full of awe. "I never would have believed our little Jason could be so incredibly talented." "He's remarkable," Stephen would respond, a proud smile lighting up his face. "Every time I see him up there, I'm reminded of everything we've been through," she'd say softly. "He's our miracle." As Jason's musical journey began to take off, their home transformed from a quiet refuge into a place filled with the lively sounds of music and laughter. The difficulties they had once faced seemed distant, and Stephen and Valerie's bond grew deeper than ever. In this season of peace and success, life offered them yet another surprise. After feeling unwell for several days, Valerie decided to take a pregnancy test. When she saw the 2 faint lines appear, she stood in shock, unable to fully believe the result. After everything they'd been through with Jason, the news of another child was both a blessing and a source of mixed emotions, an unexpected gift wrapped in excitement and a touch of apprehension. When Valerie shared the news with Stephen, his reaction was one of pure, overwhelming joy. "Pregnant?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief, his face lighting up with an immense smile. "Are we really having another baby?" Valerie nodded, her expression a blend of excitement and lingering worry as she tried to steady her own emotions. "Yes, but after everything we went through with Jason, I'm scared, Stephen," she confessed softly. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his hand gently stroking her hair as he whispered, "I know, Valerie. I know how hard it was before, but this time we're stronger, more prepared. We've faced so many challenges together and made it through every one of them." "Besides," he added, his voice filled with warmth and hope, "I've always dreamed of growing our family." He looked into her eyes, his gaze soft and filled with unwavering love. "Everything will be okay. We're resilient, and Jason is going to be an incredible big brother to his little sister." Over the following months, Valerie's initial fear gradually melted into joy and anticipation as she and Stephen eagerly awaited the arrival of their new family member. They chose the name Jessica for their baby girl. Unlike her first pregnancy, which had been fraught with difficulties, this time things went smoothly. Each ultrasound brought reassuring news about Jessica's health, and Valerie and Stephen's confidence grew with each appointment. Their story, one of perseverance and overcoming struggles, began to inspire friends and family around them. People saw Valerie as a symbol of resilience, her courage a testament to her strength. Stephen, always by her side, earned admiration for his constant support and his dedication to family, never wavering despite past obstacles or criticism. "One thing's for sure, we've come so far," Stephen remarked one day as they stood in the nursery, taking in the room filled with soft colors and baby toys. "Who would have thought we'd be here, waiting for our daughter to join us, while Jason is already making a name for himself in music?" Valerie smiled as she ran her hand tenderly over her now very round belly. "It feels like a dream, but one we've built together through so much love and perseverance. I never pictured my life taking this path," she added softly. "But standing here with you now, I wouldn't change a single thing." When Jessica was finally born, their family gathered to celebrate the precious new arrival. Jason, now 8 years old, was overjoyed to meet his baby sister. The love and happiness that filled the room was almost tangible, as though the very air around them pulsed with warmth. Little Jessica, healthy and serene, brought a new brightness to their family. What had once been a quiet, lonely apartment for Stephen was now a home, brimming with life, laughter, and hope. Valerie and Stephen, more united than ever, knew they might still face difficult times, but they were ready to tackle them together. Their journey had led them here, a testament to the strength of love and resilience, proving that, with commitment and courage, anything is possible. With Jason captivating the crowd on stage and Jessica filling their lives with fresh happiness, the Howell family moved forward, embracing a future packed with opportunities and dreams waiting to come true. I hope you found today's story inspiring. If you did, hit the subscribe button so you won't miss more stories like this. Drop a like and let us know your thoughts about the story in the comments below. Catch you in the next video.